My name is Vretholo, and I have been a combat instructor at the Galactic Defense Collective's Training Academy for 31 cycles. 31 cycles. That is long enough to have trained 614 cadets from 42 different species. Long enough to have watched Caldari twins cry on the first day. Long enough to have seen a Morvathi cadet eat the physical training manual because he thought it was a meal offering. Long enough to know with absolute certainty that I had seen everything this academy had to throw at me. I was wrong. But let me back up. Let me start at the precise moment when my 31 years of certainty walked straight into a wall. The wall's name was Yale Bruck. She arrived on a morning in early cycle when the twin suns of Station Oresh were just cresting the atmospheric dome and casting long, tired shadows across the parade grounds. I was standing at the front of my combat orientation class, 37 cadets arranged in 7 rows before me, all of them wearing the gray uniforms of the collective's basic training program. The air smelled like recycled oxygen and someone's anxiety, which is honestly how every class begins. I remember looking down my roster and seeing the new transfer name added overnight. Yale Bruck, human, age 22, transferred from the outer colonial academies on Varath Station. Now, I need you to understand something about humans, in case you have never had the distinct experience of encountering one. They are small, remarkably almost insultingly small compared to species like mine. I am a Drethani. We stand at approximately 2.5 meters. Our exoskeletal plating covers most of our upper body, and our secondary set of forearms evolved specifically for grappling in close-quarters combat situations. Our species has served as combat instructors across the collective for generations because we are objectively very difficult to hurt. We are built like armored architecture that decided to start teaching. Humans, by comparison, look like someone took a rough draft of a species and forgot to finish. 2 arms, 2 legs, soft flesh with no plating, no natural armor, no redundant organ systems of any notable complexity. Entirely too much liquid running around inside them at all times. They have this thing called adrenaline that they apparently cannot fully control, which in my professional opinion sounds deeply problematic. When Yale Bruck walked through the training hall door that morning, she was approximately 1.6 meters tall, brown hair pulled back with efficient practicality, dark eyes that were already scanning the room before she had fully stepped inside. She was carrying a standard-issue equipment bag over one shoulder and a cup of something hot in her other hand, which she was still drinking as she walked to the only remaining empty spot in the back row. The other cadets parted slightly as she passed. Not out of fear, more out of the vague instinct that you do not stand between a human and wherever they have decided to be. She finished her drink, tucked the empty cup into her bag with zero ceremony, and stood at attention. I noted her presence. I moved on. The first week of combat orientation is what I privately call the sorting phase. You watch who panics, who freezes, who performs. You watch who has been trained before and who is pretending they have. You watch the group dynamics organize themselves like sediment settling in water. In that first week, Yale Bruck said almost nothing. She listened. She completed every drill. She ran every circuit. She never finished first, but she never finished last. She ate alone at the midday rest period, reading from a small physical book that she carried in her chest pocket, and she returned to drills exactly on time. Every time, like some kind of biological clock that had been set very specifically to the schedule of an academy she had only just arrived at. The other cadets, I noticed, had started watching her, not with hostility, with curiosity, particularly the Gelran cadets, who communicate primarily through color changes in their skin, and had turned a muted shade of copper-orange around her, which in their culture roughly translates to, "We do not know what you are, but we are interested." I will be honest with you. I had her filed under the category of quietly competent, and was fully prepared for her to graduate without incident. I was, as I may have mentioned, completely wrong. It was day 11. We had moved into contact drilling, which is the portion of training where cadets practice controlled physical engagement with an instructor or senior partner. The purpose is to teach reaction timing, balance disruption, and what our curriculum calls appropriate escalation response, which is the formal way of saying, how do you behave when someone tries to physically overpower you? I always demonstrate on a cadet first. It establishes the standard. It shows the rest of the group what correct form looks like, and it gives the demonstration cadet a baseline from which to learn. I select demonstration cadets deliberately. I select ones who I believe will benefit from the visibility, or ones whose form needs visible correction, or ones who have been coasting and need a reminder that coasting is not a sustainable strategy. On day 11, I selected Yale Bruck. She stepped forward without hesitation, which I noted approvingly. Some cadets shuffle. Some look at their boots. She walked to the center of the mat with her chin level and her hands relaxed at her sides, which is exactly correct form. I explained to the class that I was going to demonstrate a controlled physical engagement starting from a dominant height position, a challenge that smaller-framed cadets must learn to navigate, and that Yale would demonstrate the appropriate defensive response. This is something I had done 312 times with cadets of varying species and sizes. I positioned myself in front of her. She looked up at me with an expression I could not immediately read. Not fear, not aggression, something quieter than both of those things. I initiated the first movement, a shoulder press from height, designed to test her balance response. She absorbed it correctly, shifted her center of gravity, and recovered footing within 2 seconds. Good. Acceptable. I initiated the second movement, a controlled grip on her upper arm, designed to simulate positional restraint. My hand encircled her arm with authority because that is what demonstration requires. The class was watching. The curriculum called for her to break the grip using rotation and counter pressure. And then, I do not know what happened in my processor in that next moment. 31 cycles, 614 cadets. I had never once broken protocol in a demonstration. I had never once allowed any personal frustration to enter a training exercise. I was, by the collective's own review board records, the most consistently disciplined instructor in this academy's recent history. But on day 11, Yale Bruck had a posture that I, in some deeply misguided corner of my professional brain, interpreted as insufficiently attentive. Her jaw was set at an angle that my 31 cycles of experience read as casual, as if this drill was not worthy of her full focus. And I made a choice I cannot take back. I struck her on the side of her face with an open palm, not hard, not with full Drathani force, which would have been genuinely dangerous. It was a contact strike, corrective in nature, the kind I had given to Keldari cadets 3 times this same cycle to reset their attention, the kind that, in Drathani training tradition, communicates wake up and pay attention without causing lasting physical harm. The sound of it was very loud in the training hall, and then, nothing moved. That silence lasted approximately 1.5 seconds. I know this because I counted it later, replaying the events in the kind of excruciating detail you engage in when your career is collapsing in real time. 36 cadets holding their breath, and then Yale Bruck moved. I want to be precise here, because imprecision would be an injustice to what occurred. She did not shout, she did not cry, she did not step back, she stepped into me. In the same breath, before the echo of the strike had fully died in the air, her left hand came up and caught my striking wrist at the joint, redirecting the remaining momentum of my arm. Her right elbow drove upward into the inner bracket of my secondary forearm, which is, for Drathani anatomy, the precise location where joint locking becomes possible. My arm went rigid. My balance shifted forward involuntarily, and then she swept my forward leg. I want you to think about that for a moment. 2.5 meters, exoskeletal plating, secondary forearms, 31 cycles of combat training, on the mat, face down. In approximately 2.25 seconds, the hall was so quiet I could hear the atmospheric recycling unit humming in the ceiling. I became aware from my position on the mat that Yale Bruck was standing over me. I could see her boots, standard issue, slightly scuffed on the left toe. Her voice when she spoke was perfectly level, not raised, not shaking, completely, almost unnervingly, calm. "Instructor Vretholo," she said, "I will not be struck again. Not a threat, not a challenge. The way you state a fact about the weather, the way you inform someone that the door is indeed locked, and that this is simply the current condition of reality." I did not respond immediately, which was, in hindsight, probably wise because I was processing several things simultaneously. 1. I was on the mat. 2. A cadet had put me on the mat. 3. 36 other cadets had witnessed a cadet put me on the mat. 4. The Gelran cadets in the second row had turned a color I had never seen before, which I later identified as somewhere between deep violet and electric silver. I looked it up that evening. It translates roughly as, "That was extraordinary, and also we are never going to forget this." I got up. This process was slower than I would have liked, and I was very aware of every moment of it. Yale Bruck had stepped back to regulation distance and resumed standing position. Her breathing had returned to entirely normal. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at me with that same unreadable expression. I looked at her for a long moment. The class was still not breathing. "Return to your position," I said. She did, and I stood there, in the center of my own training hall, on the mat I had walked across 614 times, and understood with complete and total clarity that something had just changed. Not just for me, not just for her, but for every single cadet in that room who would carry the image of that moment for the rest of their service lives. The day the human cadet dropped the instructor. Before the class could blink, I called an end to that session 20 minutes early. That night in my quarters I read her transfer file for the first time with real attention. Not the cursory glance I had given it on day one. Yale Bruck, Outer Colonial Academy. 3 years. Specialty track, close quarters restraint and emergency response. Commendation from her previous academy's director. 1 disciplinary note, filed 18 months prior, for what was recorded as an unauthorized hand-to-hand engagement with a senior trainer. Unauthorized hand-to-hand engagement. I stared at that line for a long time. The note did not include the outcome of that engagement. I suspected I already knew. What I did not yet know, sitting in my quarters reading her file while the twin suns went dark outside, and the station cycled into its night rotation, was that the next 24 hours were going to be significantly worse for me than this afternoon had been. Because Yale Bruck, I was about to discover, was not done, and the Academy's review board, which I would be sitting in front of by morning, was going to want to know exactly what had happened in Training Hall 7 on day 11, and I was going to have to explain in official terms how a 1.6-meter human cadet had rearranged my understanding of gravity. I closed her file. I did not sleep well. I have attended review hearings before. Twice, in 31 cycles, I sat in front of the collective's disciplinary board as a witness, once as a character reference for a fellow instructor whose training methods were under scrutiny, once to report a cadet who had been caught falsifying physical assessment records. Both times, I sat in the observer's chair, the comfortable one, the one on the side of the room where the table has water and the lighting is not pointed directly at your face. This time, I was in the center chair, the one with no water. The hearing room on Station Oresh is a windowless box with gray walls and gray floors and a long gray table behind which 3 senior officers of the collective's academic oversight division sit and look at you with expressions that have been professionally drained of anything resembling warmth. Above the table hangs the official seal of the collective, which is a circle containing the 11 founding species of the original charter rendered in silver against deep blue. I have always found it a handsome seal. That morning, I found it deeply threatening. Director Orath Sin presided. She is a Velhari, which means she is approximately my height, silver-scaled, with 4 eyes arranged symmetrically across her face, and the general temperament of someone who has heard every possible excuse in existence and has personally disproven all of them. She had been running academic oversight for 12 cycles. She was not cruel. She was something worse. She was precise. To her left sat Senior Auditor Fen Takras, a Keldari male with the kind of stillness that reads less like patience and more like a predatory pause. He was in charge of behavioral incident review. He had a data tablet in front of him and had not looked up from it since I entered the room. To her right was an empty chair, which I assumed was a late arrival. I sat down. Director Orath Sin looked at me for 3 full seconds before speaking. "Instructor Vretholo," she said. "You understand why you are here?" "Yes," I said. "Summarize it for the record." I took a breath. During a contact demonstration drill on cycle day 11, I struck Cadet Bruck across the face with an open palm. The strike was not authorized under current training protocols for cadets of human classification. Takras made a note. "Not authorized," Orath Sin repeated, with the particular emphasis of someone tasting something that has gone slightly bad. That is one way to characterize it. "It was wrong," I said. "I am not here to argue otherwise." She looked at me for another moment. "The cadet has filed no formal complaint." That stopped me. I had assumed the complaint was the reason we were here. I had spent the night building a mental architecture around the certainty that Yale Bruck had walked directly from Training Hall 7 to the administrative offices and lodged a formal grievance that would dismantle my career with the same efficient economy she had used to dismantle my balance. "She filed no complaint," I repeated. "No," said Orath Sin. "The incident was reported by 3 other cadets, independently, within 2 hours of the session ending. I processed this. 3 cadets had gone, separately, of their own initiative, to report what they had witnessed. Not the cadet who had been struck. 3 witnesses who had decided, without being asked, that what happened in that training hall required official attention." Takras finally looked up from his tablet. "The Gelran cadets specifically. All 3 of them. The Gelran cadets, who had turned that impossible color, that silver violet I had never seen before, who apparently had not just recorded it in their skin but had also gone to write it down somewhere official." "I see," I said. "There is also," said Orath Sin, "footage. Training halls are recorded. This is standard." I had known this. I had somehow, in the collapse of the previous evening, managed to not fully reckon with this fact until exactly this moment. She turned a screen on the table to face me. I watched myself strike a cadet. I watched the sound travel across the room in the way you can see it travel when you know where to look. The slight flinch in bodies that were not touched. I watched Yale Bruck move. I watched it in the merciless honesty of a recording that had no opinion about what it captured. It simply showed what happened. 2.25 seconds. It looked faster on recording. That was somehow the worst part. On the footage, the whole thing looked so inevitable, like watching a door swing shut. One motion leading directly to the next. No hesitation anywhere in the sequence. The screen went dark. "She is very good," said Takras. He said it with a neutrality that I could not decide was professional or reluctant. "Yes," I said, "she is." "That is not the point of this hearing," said Orith Sin, with the tone of someone redirecting a conversation that was drifting somewhere inconvenient. "The point is your conduct, Instructor, not her response to it." "I understand. Do you want to explain the decision?" "Not particularly," I said, "because the honest explanation reflects poorly on me, and the dishonest explanation would waste everyone's time, and I have already wasted enough of it." Orith Sin blinked, 2 of her 4 eyes, then the other 2, in the Velhari sequence that indicates she has been mildly surprised. "Go on," she said. "I misread her posture as inattention," I said. "I applied a correction that I have used with Keldari cadets without incident. I applied it without accounting for the fact that it was not appropriate for her species, her classification, or the terms under which human cadets are trained at this academy. I knew those terms. I chose not to apply them in the moment. That is the entirety of it." Takras was writing again. "Keldari cadets," said Orith Sin slowly, "have a different cultural context for physical correction during training. That is documented in our protocol guidelines. It is. Humans do not share that context. They do not. You are aware," she said, "that the protocol guidelines for human cadet training were updated 7 cycles ago specifically to remove physical correction as an authorized instructional method. I am. You were part of the instruction committee that approved those guidelines." There it was. I sat with that for a moment. There was genuinely nothing to say that would improve the situation, so I said the only thing that was accurate. "Yes, I was." The door on the far side of the room opened. The person who walked in was not someone I expected. She was wearing civilian administrative attire rather than a uniform, and she moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who has cleared their schedule because this particular meeting was worth clearing it for. She sat in the empty chair to Orith Sin's right. "Apologies for my delay," she said. "Transit from the outer ring." Orith Sin nodded. "Instructor, this is Liaison Marat Dos. She oversees human cadet integration across collective academies." Marat Dos had the look of someone who had been doing a specific and exhausting job for a very long time and had developed as a result an absolute economy of expression. She placed her hands flat on the table, looked at me and said, "I read the report on the way here. I have 2 questions." "Go ahead," I said. "Did you know when you struck her that she had a hand-to-hand commendation from her previous posting?" I had not read her file carefully enough to retain that detail. I said, "No." "And did you know," she continued without any particular change in tone, "that the previous senior trainer she engaged without authorization at Verath Station outweighed her by approximately 400 kilograms? I looked at her. "He also did not read her file carefully enough," said Marat Dos. "He is currently teaching administrative processing on a transport station that services agricultural routes." The room was very quiet. "Humans," said Marat Dos, with the mild patience of someone explaining something for the 400th time, "do not escalate the way other species do. They do not warn in stages. They do not perform preliminary signaling behaviors. They make a decision, and then they execute the decision, and the gap between those 2 events is considerably smaller than most other species find comfortable." She tilted her head slightly. "Cadet Bruck in particular. Her file notes this specifically." "The disciplinary note," I said, "which was expunged 6 months after it was filed, when it was determined that the senior trainer in question had initiated unauthorized physical contact first." She looked at me very steadily. "Does any of this sound familiar?" It did. It sounded extremely familiar. It sounded like a pattern that should have perhaps been made more prominent in the briefing materials I had clearly not read with sufficient attention. Orith Sin took over again. "The board will be recommending a formal reprimand, Instructor. Your record will reflect the incident. You will complete a mandatory review of cross-species training protocols, which, given your role on the committee that wrote several of them, should be a relatively brief process." She paused. You will also return to active instruction. I looked at her. The cadet filed no complaint, she said again. That is relevant to our decision. Additionally, and here she glanced at something on her own tablet, Cadet Bruck submitted a written statement this morning, voluntarily. What did it say? Oroth Sin read from the tablet without expression. The statement reads, Instructor Vretholo has been a rigorous and effective training educator. The incident on day 11 was a single lapse in protocol judgment. I do not believe it reflects his overall conduct or his capacity to instruct. I request that the board consider his full record. End of statement. I sat with that for a moment that lasted considerably longer than it appeared from the outside. A cadet I had struck had written a statement defending my career. I genuinely did not know what to do with that information. I filed it in the part of my mind that handles things requiring extended processing time, and I filed it there very carefully. Return to the training hall by tomorrow morning, said Oroth Sin. Dismissed. I walked out of that hearing room into a corridor that looked exactly like it always did, gray and functional and entirely indifferent to whatever had just happened inside it, and I stood there for a moment adjusting to the reality of still having a career. When I arrived at the training hall the following morning, the cadets were already assembled. 37 of them, all 7 rows. They snapped to attention when I walked in, which they always do, which is protocol, which means nothing on its own. But the Gelran cadets in the second row were a color I now recognized, that silver violet, watching me with all of their attention, and Yael Bruck in the back row was standing with her chin level and her hands relaxed at her sides, exactly as she had on her first day, except that this time when our eyes met, there was something small and clear in her expression. Not a smile, not quite, but something adjacent to it. The look of someone who has made a decision and is comfortable with the outcome. I stood at the front of the hall. Day 12, I said. We continue contact drilling. And then, because 31 cycles has to count for something, and because I am a Drothany instructor who has had precisely one cadet put him on his own mat, and because I believe in learning from data no matter how uncomfortable the data makes you feel, I said one more thing. Cadet Bruck, front and center. She walked forward. Same walk, same efficiency, same scuffed left boot. Yesterday, I said to her and to the room, this cadet executed a 2-point takedown on a fully plated Drothany instructor in 2¼ seconds using joint redirection and a balance sweep. I looked at the class. Today she is going to teach all of you how she did it. The Gelran cadets shifted to a color I had never seen on them before. I did not look it up until later that evening. It translated to, now the class is actually beginning. I stepped aside. Yael Bruck turned to face 36 cadets of 12 different species, tucked her hands behind her back and said, with the same level calm she brought to absolutely everything, all right, let's start with where the weight actually lives in a larger body. Because most of you are thinking about the arms, that's the wrong place to look. She paused. The floor always wins, she said. You just have to introduce your opponent to it properly. And somewhere in that training hall, I think I heard my 31 cycles of certainty finally finish recalibrating. It did not sound like defeat. It sounded surprisingly like relief.